The finest hours of the Second World War. The Desert Fox. 1940. Confrontations occur throughout Africa. In mid-September, Italian troops attack the Allied garrison in Somalia from Ethiopia, while 260,000 men under Rodolfo Graziani begin the offensive to conquer Egypt from Libya. The British, under the command of General O'Connor, halt the Italian advance, while the Royal Navy shell Benghazi in their rear with artillery fire from the aircraft carrier Illustrious and the battleship Valiant. Allied troops, including Free French soldiers, begin Operation Menace, with the objective of occupying Dakar in French-speaking Africa. The Vichy government responds with aerial attacks on Gibraltar. On the 27th of September, Germany, Japan, and Italy signed the Tripartite Pact. The military, political, and economic alliance of the three countries will, the signatories hope, intimidate the Americans and keep them out of the war. The unstoppable dynamic of the war increases the European dictators' concerns about power. Mussolini, in an imitation of Hitler's tactics, proposes to pursue his own war and plans to occupy Yugoslavia. The Führer opposes the move, and finally, without warning his allies, the Italian dictator invades Greece on the 28th of October. The Nazi leader, en route from Munich to Florence on his train America, receives the news with consternation. The serious expression on the face of the German leader only partly reveals his fury about what he considers an enormous strategic error on the part of the Duce. The idiot should have carried out an attack on Crete, or at least tried to take the base at Alexandria, he comments to one of the generals accompanying him. Upon arrival, he is greeted by a confident Duce's, "My Führer, we are on the march." The Italian troops have invaded Greece from Albania in a makeshift manner and employing a naive military strategy, advancing rapidly in imitation of the German soldiers. Both the Duce and General Sebastian Visconti, in charge of the army, are convinced the adventure will be a triumphal procession that will take only a few weeks. But the nightmare is not long in coming. The mountainous terrain and bad weather, together with fierce Greek resistance under General Alexander Papagos, halt the advance. Hitler, immersed in planning the invasion of the Soviet Union, has observed the moments of his ally Mussolini in Africa, the Balkans, and now Greece, with dismay. He is aware that the present situation could place his short and medium-term plans in risk, and believes the solution in southern Europe is to obtain the help of General Franco, though the Spanish leader continues to hold back. The Duce is the German leader's only strong ally, and he summons him to Germany to analyze the future strategic plan. The meeting takes place in the Berghof, the Eagle's Nest. The heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff insist that control of Gibraltar and the Suez Canal is essential for victory. This would trap the British ships operating in the Mediterranean, turning them into sitting ducks for the Axis power submarines and aerial bombing. But the British are conscious of the strategic importance of Gibraltar. The Rock, ceded by Spain in the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, has become a very difficult fortress to take. Its location makes it an essential logistical point for control of the anti-submarine war and maritime traffic. If the Rock of Gibraltar falls into the hands of the Nazis, Africa and the Near East will follow. From there, the ships loaded with supplies leave for Malta, a base for RAF attacks on the ports of the south of Italy and enemy supply lines. The island, situated between Alexandria and Gibraltar, and only 20 minutes flying time from Sicily, is like a traffic policeman in the Mediterranean, wearing a British uniform. Mussolini's air force has submitted it to heavy bombing for some time, but its naval and military installations remain intact, while its inhabitants find shelter in the island's ancient catacombs and caves. The Mediterranean, which the Duce calls the Italian Lake, in reality belongs to the ships of the Royal Navy. On the 14th of November, Greek troops with Allied reinforcements force Visconti's soldiers to retreat towards Albania, destroying the fascist myth of the 8 million bayonets. Hitler, who has seen his plans changed for good, still hopes to get Spain to enter the war on Germany's side in Operation Felix. It is essential to take Gibraltar and utilize the Canary Islands, Madeira, and Morocco to expel the British for good from the Mediterranean, the Führer explains to his general staff. He calls on Franco to order his troops to attack Gibraltar, but the Spanish leader requests 500,000 tons of maize before intervening in the conflict. The Führer believes this is merely an excuse to gain time and avoid entering the war. Someday, I will ask him to explain his position, he comments. The Italian failure in Greece and Franco's unwillingness to enter the war has messed up Hitler's plans to concentrate on the war in the north of Europe before turning to the Mediterranean. But given the circumstances, he tells his generals, "We cannot allow the British to install an airbase in Athens." The Spanish government again shows its unwillingness to collaborate in Hitler's plans when it refuses his request to allow German troops to cross the peninsula to occupy Gibraltar. (1941). On the 5th of January, the 6th Australian Division joins the assault, substituting the Indian troops, and the Allied advance continues apace, meeting little resistance from the poorly supplied Italian forces. Churchill's armies cross the Libyan frontier and fall on the city of Badia, where 30,000 Italians are taken prisoner. To begin with, the Allies intend to take control of North Africa and then use their installations as a platform to invade Italy and later the Balkans, Romania, and Bulgaria. On the 22nd of January, British and Australian armored units take Tobruk and capture a further 35,000 enemy soldiers. This town, with its deep water port, is considered vital to the development of the war. General Richard O'Connor's troops continue their westward advance along the Balbia coastal route, taking Gazala, Timimi, and Derna, and marching towards Benghazi, another strategic point for the arrival of provisions. In the interior of the country, under Allied pressure, the Duce's men crack Mchili. Unable to find an exit route or receive help, they are forced to surrender. On the 7th of February, Benghazi and the Cyrenaica fall, and the Allies capture another 60,000 enemy soldiers. Field Marshal Graziani, fearful of confronting the 7th British Armored Division, the Desert Rats, orders his troops to withdraw to the west. O'Connor's men, exhausted by long marches and combat, halt at Marsa el Brega and El Algeila and wait for supplies and reinforcements for their march on Tripoli. The British High Command is aware that moving too great a distance from fuel supplies could be an error and decides to halt the advance, maintaining the positions reached to defend Egypt. A number of the Allied divisions that participated in the raid incursion are transferred to strengthen the forces on the Ethiopian and Greek fronts. The recent conquests in Libyan territory are to be defended by new, untried troops under O'Connor's substitute, General Philip Neame. They dig in along the first line between El Algeila and Ajedaiba. At the same time, New Zealanders and Australians attack the Italian positions in Sudan and the garrison in Somalia. Mussolini's armies collapse under Allied pressure, and Hitler is forced to speedily come to his aid. Air Fleet 2 under Field Marshal Kesselring, abandons its preparations for the Russian campaign and transfers to Sicily. The priority of the 2,000 German fighter planes is to control the airspace and the sea between the south of Italy and the north of Africa in order to squeeze the British out of Malta. The disastrous role of the Italian armed forces in North Africa worries Hitler and his high command. The OKW link their plans to the defense of the French colonies in Africa, with the expulsion of the British from Egypt, which will open the way to the oil of the Middle East. Hitler knows Churchill's plans. Worried that Britain could defeat Italy and the Allies open a new front in the south of Europe, he sends a message aimed at calming Mussolini's nerves. We have a common enemy, Britain, and one overriding objective: to control the Mediterranean, Gibraltar, and Suez. As a result of the different analyses, the Africa Corps is created, an elite corps composed of motorized infantry, artillery, and armored divisions, which are to help the Italians under General Garibaldi, Graziani's substitute. The Führer's orders are for these brigades to only operate in defensive missions and under Italian command. To lead these special units, considered more political than military, a brilliant panzer commander and author of a book entitled Infantry Attacks is chosen: General Erwin Rommel. Rommel arrives at Castel Benito in the north of Libya aboard a Heinkel 111 on the 12th of February. 2 days later, the first troops of the 5th Light Panzer Division disembark. Air support is to be provided by Kesselring's planes in Sicily. Rommel meets with more than 100,000 demoralized and tired Italian soldiers, whom 3 Allied divisions have pushed back around 1,000 kilometers from Sidi el Barani in Egypt to Marsa el Brega and Al-Helia in Libya. On the 11th of March, having reorganized the troops, he requests more men from an impatient Hitler, who authorizes the 15th Panzer Division to be sent to North Africa. But the Führer warns Rommel, any movement you intend to make must be authorized by the High Command. In Europe, meanwhile, Bulgaria finally bows to pressure and allows German troops to cross its territory, heading for the frontier with Greece. In mid-March, Yugoslavia becomes a new member of the Axis. The majority of the population opposed the move, and the Cvetković government is overthrown in a coup. The 16-year-old Pedro becomes the new regent, and the recently formed government headed by General Dusan Simović pulls out of the Tripartite Pact. Hitler, angry about having to delay the invasion of the Soviet Union and furious about Simović's decision, orders Greece to be attacked and Yugoslavia destroyed. Churchill, informed of the Nazi leader's plans, orders reinforcements and arms to be immediately sent to Greece. In the country's ports, the Royal Navy disembarked 50,000 British and New Zealand soldiers to defend the cradle of Western democracy against the German offensive. On the 28th of March, ships from the Italian fleet enter the Aegean Sea to try to cut off supplies to the Greeks. British ships confront them in the Battle of Cape Matapan and sink 5 Italian battleships, causing the deaths of 3,000 sailors. The British are aware of German moves and of Rommel's arrival in Libya. Confident and entrenched in the positions occupied following their victories over the Italians, they are convinced that any action the German general decides to carry out will take time. Meanwhile, the commander of the Africa Corps is getting to grips with the problems his men face. In the first maneuvers aimed at adapting to the terrain, the desert proves itself to be a truly desolate battlefield. Sandstorms paralyze the soldiers and clog up engines, something that could be very costly in combat. There is only one usable road, the Via Balbia, 2,000 kilometers long, linking Tripoli with Egypt. It is clear that he and the soldiers of the Africa Corps have much to learn. Rommel begins to act on his own, independently of the Italian command. He knows that the number of Allied troops has been reduced by the transfer of men to other fronts, and that they have been worn down by their clashes with the Duce's armies. His strategy will be based on surprise and on taking advantage of the enemy's weaknesses, using all kinds of deceptive tactics and camouflage. By the 30th of March, the German general possesses detailed information of the weak points in the British positions in Cyrenaica and sends different formations against them to test their strength. Confirming the weakness of the Allied lines, in the early hours of the 31st, German armored columns begin their advance towards Marsa el Brega, supported by air. Taken by surprise, the British try to close the El Aguila Pass that gives access to the Cyrenaica region, but the strength of the attack forces them to retreat. The garrison in Brega surrenders at the beginning of the afternoon. Disobeying Hitler's orders and seeing the enemy retreating, the impetuous Rommel decides to continue his march to retake Cyrenaica. In Cairo, Wavell, impressed by the German initiative, is confident that Rommel will not cross the desert, but rather march along the coast, and therefore orders his troops to block his way. But the talented German strategist has split his regiments into 3 groups, one of which occupies Benghazi on the 4th of April, and the other 2, Msus and Ben Gamma, on the 6th. At the same time, the Italians of the Brescia Division march to El Michili and Derna, where Generals O'Connor and Neyam are captured. The Stutka and Me-109 planes take control of the air and bomb all the Allied fronts, forcing a retreat. The Axis forces take Tamimi and continue their advance both through the desert and along the coast with their sights on Tobruk. There is surprise in Rome and Berlin, and in London there is astonishment. In just a few days, the Axis forces under Rommel have made a spectacular advance. They have pushed the exhausted Allied forces from the outskirts of Tripoli to the Egyptian frontier. There only remains one position heavily defended by the 20th Australian Infantry Brigade under General Leslie Moorhead: Tobruk. The city possesses the only deep-water port between Benghazi and Alexandria. Fortified conscientiously under the Italian occupation, it is now in the hands of Allied troops, heavily entrenched and with plenty of ammunition and artillery. It has become a belligerent oasis surrounded by Axis troops. Churchill tells Wavell that Tobruk must be defended to the last man. The German general and his troops have a serious problem. They can't continue their advance without an efficient line of supply. Tobruk is the key to supply an important strategic point for the development of the Desert War. Rommel knows it, and his men need it. On the 6th of April, 33 German divisions with the support of Italian and Hungarian forces invade Yugoslavia across all its frontiers. Belgrade suffers heavy bombing, and after 11 days of fighting, the country is totally occupied. Its territory is divided up between Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Bulgaria. At the same time, troops and panzer units penetrate the north of Greece, while the Luftwaffe bombs Greek supply lines and the port of Piraeus. On the 11th of April, the German advance is halted by British troops, who can only hold out for 2 days. The Germans cross the Ali Akman line, and the Allied soldiers are forced to retreat from their positions on Mount Olympus to Thermopylae. The German advance is unstoppable. In the face of the approaching disaster, the Greek Prime Minister Alexander Korzius commits suicide, and General Papagos requests that the Allied troops withdraw via the southern ports of Greece. On the 24th of April, the Greek army capitulates, and the king goes into exile. 27,000 British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers have been evacuated to the island of Crete from Nauplia, Kalamata, Monemvasia, Megara, and Port Rafti. Rommel orders the attacks against Tobruk to continue day and night, and decides to continue the march to Egypt. The siege of the city begins on the 10th of April. In fierce fighting, the Australians hold off the Axis attacks, under heavy attacks from the Luftwaffe. On the 11th of April, he occupies Bardia, and on the 13th, Fort Capuzzo. On the 30th of April, the pressure of the Afrika Korps on Tobruk intensifies. The defenders resist with their hopes placed on the arrival of reinforcements coming on British ships in Operation Tiger. On the 12th of May, the ships dock in Alexandria with 238 tanks and 43 planes. On the 15th, Sir Archibald Wavell begins Operation Brevity, the first to be carried out against the Afrika Korps to break the siege of Tobruk. The initiative is unsuccessful and provokes a counterattack from Rommel, which penetrates Egyptian territory up to the Halfaya Pass, where he halts his march on the 27th and establishes a line of defense. At the end of May, there is a pause on both fronts, and the Royal Navy ships are able to disembark 84 tons of supplies and 16,000 soldiers. Panic spreads in London, and Churchill orders the forces to regroup to begin a counteroffensive to recover the Halfaya Pass. At the same time, the resistance in Tobruk continues. Crete is approximately 260 kilometers long and has a large port in the Bay of Suda and 3 airfields at Melemne, Rethymnon, and Heraklion. The British forces have made the island a strategic support base for their armies in Greece, Turkey, Palestine, and Egypt. Control of Crete is essential for control of the eastern Mediterranean. The German High Command knows this, and once Greece is conquered, the occupation of the island will be crucial. But planning the occupation causes arguments inside the High Command. Fear of the British fleet leads Goring to propose an invasion by air, with naval support. For the Führer, the paratroopers represent the elite of German youth, and he is reluctant to use them in this action. However, given Göring's insistence, he orders Operation Mercury for the 20th of May. The soldiers who are seen as the flower of the Reich will be charged with taking Crete. At the start of May, British intelligence knows that the German invasion is imminent. Churchill orders his troops to defend the island to the last man. The Germans plan to launch 15,000 men from the air, with a further 7,000 attacking the island from the sea, in order to quickly capture the cities of Melemna, Rethmino, and Heraklion. On the 15th of May, aerial bombing of the islands begins to prepare the way for invasion. On the morning of the 20th, the first great air transportation operation of history has begun. Composed of 1,200 planes, including 500 Junkers and hundreds of gliders, the German occupation forces appear above Crete, and the spring sky fills with thousands of paratroopers. On their descent, the German soldiers are the targets of intense fire from the British troops, causing heavy casualties during the first day of the invasion. Nevertheless, 5,000 men managed to reach the outskirts of the Malemi airfield, the main objective. Hitler is so alarmed about the initial results of the operation that he forbids Radio Berlin from speaking about it until victory is achieved. The loss of thousands of young paratroopers leads him to fall out with Göring, who puts pressure on General Kurt Student to take the objectives as soon as possible. By nightfall, the airfields at Heraklion and Rethmion are still in British hands, though Melemne has fallen to the Germans. In the early hours of the 21st of May, part of the British fleet providing naval support to the island is heavily bombed by Nazi planes, and the cruiser Jumo is knocked out of action. In the afternoon, the British sink a dozen German landing craft and 3 ships, causing the deaths of more than 6,000 soldiers. 2 days later, the Nazis launch their counteroffensive, which traps a part of the Royal Navy without the protection of its fighter planes. 1 battleship, 4 cruisers, and 8 destroyers are sunk or put out of action. The remaining ships are forced to flee. The land fight and the continual German bombing have significantly reduced the number of Allied troops on the island. Both armies are paying a high price for Crete. The German troops, under heavy pressure and exhausted by hard fighting, begin a desperate assault on the city of Canea, the port of access to the Bay of Suda. After a night of heavy fighting, they manage to break through the British lines. Unable to stop the German attack, the Allied commander, New Zealander Bernard Freyberg, decides on the 27th to evacuate his men. "15,000 are saved off the beaches and the coast, but 13,000 are left behind, either dead or taken prisoner by the Germans." In 3 days, Crete has fallen. The high number of casualties suffered by the German forces transported by air leads Hitler to ban operations of this sort in the future. On the 8th of June, 20,000 Allied soldiers under General Wilson invade Syria from Palestine and are able to defeat and expel the 40,000 Vichy French soldiers commanded by Henri Dance. On the 15th of June, General Wavell starts the ambitious Operation Battle Axe to retake the Halfaya Pass, put an end to the siege of Tobruk, and push the Axis troops out of Cyrenaica. But the new tanks that reinforce the 7th Armored Division have mechanical problems and succumb to German anti-tank fire. After 4 days of heavy fighting, Rommel and the 5th Light Panzer Division have demonstrated once again their strategic ability, carrying out a tenacious operation which manages to destroy half the British tanks. Wavell's men are forced to retreat to their starting point. Operation Battle Axe has been a complete failure. In Tobruk, meanwhile, the Australian soldiers keep up their defense. The German general is planning to launch a definitive attack to take the city and inflict a serious blow to British supremacy on the sea routes. However, his armies begin to suffer from a lack of supplies due to Operation Barbarossa. In mid-July, Operation Substance gets underway with the objective of taking supplies from Gibraltar to Malta. The besieged island, with its airfield and naval base, continues to create problems for the Axis supply routes, which link Italy with North Africa by sea and air. U-boats make their presence felt in the Mediterranean at the end of September to counteract these operations. The aircraft carriers Argus and Ark Royal are their first victims. Following the failure of the British offensive, Churchill, alarmed at the situation in this strategically important region, dismisses Wavell and puts General Claude Auchinleck in his place. Five months have passed since the start of the siege of Tobruk, and the forces defending it have held out. Given their desperate situation, Churchill calls on General Auchinleck to act as soon as possible. On the 18th of November, in heavy rain, Auchinleck begins Operation Crusader, the new Allied offensive to relieve Tobruk and push the Axis troops out of Africa for good. 1,000 tanks under General Andrew Cunningham and soldiers form the British 30th Corps, changing direction from Halfaya Pass and attack from the south the German panzers in Sidi Rezegh. Next, they turn northwest to confront the Germans besieging Tobruk. Meanwhile, General Freyberg, with the New Zealand Division, attempts to capture Sollum, and the 4th Indian Division attacks Halfaya Pass and Sidi Omar. On the 19th, Cunningham's tanks are able to break through the Axis Army's first cordon and confront the second ring of defense formed by Italian M13 armored vehicles. Once again, just when it looks like the British will trap the Afrika Korps, Rommel makes a series of tactical changes and is able to capture 35 Allied tanks, forcing Cunningham to retreat to the Nile on the 22nd. Auchinleck, up to date with the situation, immediately replaces him with General Neil Ritchie, whom he instructs to counterattack with all the available forces. Rommel, in one of his few strategic errors, decides to transfer all the motorized units harassing Tobruk to reinforce the soldiers defending Halfaya and Sollum. Ritchie regroups his troops, while RAF planes take control of the air and attack Rommel's armored vehicles. Fortunately for the British general, the Afrika Korps chief experiences a series of problems with his command car near Sidi Omar and is unable to communicate with his officers. Unable to contact Rommel, Siegfried Westphal, the chief of operations of the panzers attacking Tobruk, decides to withdraw to the west, enabling the British to enter the city. Communication re-established, Rommel is informed of the scarcity of provisions and lack of air support, which is placing his men in a precarious situation. Auchinleck, on the other hand, confident of victory as he continues to receive supplies via Alexandria, moves to the headquarters in Madalena, where he is informed of the retreat of the German forces defending Sollum and Halfaya. His instructions are to attack everything he encounters without rest. Without any prospect of reinforcements until January, on the 7th of December, Rommel continues his withdrawal, which turns out to be more difficult than foreseen due to the constant attacks from British planes. Determined to save what remains of the Africa Corps, he does not accept the orders of Marshal Caballero to defend Cyrenaica. At the end of December, the German general and his men are entrenched in El Agahelia, from where they began the offensive 9 months earlier. At last, the siege of Tobruk has been lifted.